So we're going to start with the most significant bicycle here. This bicycle...
Is that legal on the bike path?
Yeah, you can ride this anywhere. This is a regular bicycle, although it does have some limitations. Here's the brake. It's called a spoon brake. You see why it's called a spoon brake? And all it does is rub on the tire and slow you down. If you try to use it, it'll get red hot. It doesn't stop. You know how you stop this bike? No, you hold back on the pedals. So you use your leg muscles to keep the bike from going. Can you put your feet down on this bike? No, you'll fall over. You know the biggest problem with this bike? Why we don't ride them anymore?
They don't stop.
No. The biggest problem with this bike is an accident called the header. In England, they called it the imperial crowner because your crown is the top of your head. And what would happen is you'd be riding along on this bike, and there'd be a root or a stick or a dog. And if you hit that object in the road, this is what the bike does. Now, what's going on here? You see the problem? Can you see the problem? Your feet, your legs are under the handlebar. How are you going to get your feet down? You can't. What hits first? Your head. It's estimated in the 10 years that these were the rage, the most popular bike in the world, over 1,000 people were killed in that accident. But in those 10 years, these things were incredibly popular. There were groups of people, they would dress up. Remember now, this bike is from 1886, so it's 20 years after the Civil War. So in America, it was very militaristic. They'd go out in uniforms, they being men. It was predominantly a male activity to ride high-wheel bikes. But there were women that did ride them. So if you look at the history, you'll find some very famous, celebrated women riders too. But at the time, it was considered not proper for ladies to climb up on a big thing like this and parade around in public. That changed.
How do you get, I've always wondered, how do you get on it?
So you carry around a ladder. No. There's a ladder built into the back of the bike. It's called a peg. So now, in the 1880s, people were very athletic, right? They were used to riding around on horses. A lot of people did manual labor. They were very fit. And so it was pretty easy, and a lot of those guys would vault onto the saddle. They could do a pedal mount, which means you walk along, you get the bike going, and you step on the pedal, and you get up on the bike. But it's risky. You could fall. Could also go sideways and wreck the bike. These bikes, when they were made, were the most expensive thing you could buy besides a house. It was like buying a Rolls Royce. So you didn't want to wreck them. This bike was made in Chicopee, Massachusetts in 1886. The company was Victor. It was one of the most popular companies in the world. Overman Wheel Company was their official name. So to get on it, you put your foot on the peg, making sure that your toe's not going to hit the tire. And then you push along like it's a scooter. And when you get up to speed, you would hold on like this. When you get up to speed, you hop up on the saddle. So people,
Get off? How do you get off?
you go the back way. You climb down the back. Or you can jump off. So that was the most common thing. So people always ask, isn't it awful to ride? But it's actually a joy to ride. You sit super high up in the air. The wheel is a 56-inch wheel. That means that if you hit a pothole in the road, the wheel spans the pothole and you don't feel it that much. So a very smooth ride. Plus, you've got a saddle that is completely suspended. So if I could take it off. So the only thing between you and the bike is air. And there's a nice spring on here. Doesn't really do much, but the suspended saddle makes sure you aren't in contact with anything hard. So I had to restore this bike.
It's a hammock.
What?
It's a hammock.
It is. It is a hammock, exactly. So this bike came out of the bicycle center in Santa Cruz, and it was, somebody volunteered to come up and hold this for a second. You just hold the handle. Yeah, it's heavy. Don't let it fall on you, it'll hurt you. So you might have heard of this guy. For this book? Tom Cuthbertson.
I learned everything in that book.
Nicest guy in the world. Tom Cuthbertson, who worked at the Bicycle Center, which is a shop I worked at in Santa Cruz, he was tooling along down towards Monterey, and there was a flea market on the side of the road. You might remember it had been around a long time. And this bike was at that flea market. And he bought it probably in 77, somewhere around there. And in 1986, I was at the Bicycle Center then, and by that time, it wasn't my bike. It was still, it's a long story. Tom sold the bike to the owner of the Bicycle Center because Tom needed money, and Roger bought the bike and put it on display in the Bicycle Center, became the mojo for the store. They put on their sign, they had it on their shirts, everything, this bike. And the deal was, Tom would take the money, Roger would get the bike, but anytime Tom wanted to ride the bike, he could ride the bike. So he would come in and Tom would hop, well, I'd be working. I'd see it go out the door. He'd ride it down Mission Street, if you can believe it, turn right on Laurel Street and ride down the hill. Well, once the wheels get spinning about, once the wheels going about 30 miles an hour, you can barely keep your feet on the pedals. And what the skilled riders would do is they just lift their feet up and rest their legs over here so the feet are out here, and they just let the wheel spin. That way, if you crash, you at least land on your feet. But if you land on your feet and you jump away from the bike, it's still chasing you. Weighs about 60 pounds. But anyway, so Tom is the guy who found the bike, and Tom was the guy that rode it first. Tom didn't restore the bike. When Tom got the bike, it was kind of a mess. And when I got the bike, which is another long story, I mean, I have a picture here, but I don't have any way to blow it up. But this is about 1987. I managed to talk Roger into selling me the bike. So I got the bike, and then, of course, every time the doorbell would ring, Tom would want to ride it. But I brought the bike back. The hardest thing was rebuilding the wheel. Because the wheels is. They
manufacture the tires?
So we'll get into the technology a little bit. So the tire is actually, looks like a hose with a very small hole inside the hose. There's no air in there. And to put the tire on, there's actually a seam in the tire. And so this feels like a hose. It's solid rubber. I could cut it with a knife and it would just go back together again. And that's because the wire inside there is super tight. You put the wire in, it comes out on either end at the slit in the tire. And then there's a special tool you make that winds the wire and tightens this tighter and tighter and tighter on the rim. So you could pull it off. See how it'll roll off? But it's held on tight by the wire. So you can't get a flat tire, and you can get thousands and thousands of miles out of this.
Tire then, or did you?
No. So that's a good question. When you get a bike like this, if you find one, if you're lucky enough to find one, most of them are in museums. If you find an original one, there's a guy that works with Paul Sadoff, Brendan Lehman. Do you know him? Yeah. He just helped put on the cyclocross race. Yeah. He just found one. Yeah. And yeah, it's original. It's really beat up. That's the way this was. So I had to take it all apart and fix everything, have reproduction stuff done. But you can buy the rubber from other collectors. And the rubber on the back is different than the rubber on the front. It's different diameter to fit the diameter of the rim. So these bikes were all the rage because for the first time, a person could hop on something under his own power, go further than he could on a horse. So imagine if you ride a horse sweats, it's hot out, you're even hotter because you're sitting on a horse. Got to feed the horse needs water. Well, suddenly it was this amazing thing. You could hop on a bicycle, you could go as far as you want. There's a breeze. You know, you hop on a bicycle, a hot day, you have a breeze. You're sitting up high as the horse, which you're used to. You can see forever, and you're in charge. You can do whatever you want. This whole new world of adventure, meeting people you'd never met before, seeing farms and buildings and stores, this made it happen. So it became incredibly popular. for about 10 years. And then they realized, boy, this thing is dangerous. So I want to show you what happened. This has a fixed gear, right? No gears. The reason that this was popular, and the reason before this we had bikes with same size wheels. In the 1817 they had one that was more like a scooter. By 1840 they had one that looked a little more like the bikes we ride today. And by 1865 we had what they called a bone shaker. It had wood wheels with steel bands on them, very slippery on pavement. And they called bone shakers because they're super hard to ride. The problem with all those bikes was they were fixed gear and they had little wheels. So you couldn't get very far, you couldn't go very fast because the wheels were too small. How fast can you pedal? So they said, we can fix that. We need a bigger front wheel. And that's what happened. The wheel went bigger and bigger and bigger. Now the limit to the size of the wheel had to do with how tall you are. If you're taller, you could ride a bigger wheel. So I've seen bikes that are 60 inches, which is humongous. So we have hard rubber tire, no air. We have fixed gear. We have a spoon brake. We have a leather saddle, but it's all steel. The whole bike is steel. So we're going to go ahead. You already know the answer to this question, but maybe you didn't read the memo. So we're going to jump ahead and we're going to look at another bike. I think it's okay. So this is called a ladies' pneumatic. So this is pretty cool. So this is 1886, all right? Now think about this in context of today. Think about what bikes were like in 2010 or 2000 or 1990 or 1970. Think about the latest thing you've seen in 2025, okay? Or what you might be riding right now. Now this is 1886. What do you think this is? Did you read the newsletter? It's 1896. 10 years, that's all. That bike was gone. The people still riding them, but everybody's laughing at them. You're on old technology. You're going to get killed if you ride that thing. What are you doing? You know, get with the future. So this was a lady's bike. Now check this out. 1896, what's that look like?
Wow.
It's an anatomic saddle. It's got a cutout. I mean, people told you that was invented by Avocet in 1980. This is 1896, already existed. Now, they didn't have aluminum yet. Aluminum came along in 1892, right around there. But they knew steel was too heavy. So they made the fender out of hickory, much lighter. The rims are made out of hickory. The chain guard is made out of hickory. So look how beautiful it is. So now check this out. What do we have today?
Bamboo.
We do. Carbon fiber is exactly right. It was a composite material. So when you buy wheels today, do they have the same number of spokes that they had in 1970 or 1980? No. This bike has 36 spokes in the rear, 32 spokes in the front. Already, in 1896, they realized fewer spokes is an advance. Look, air in the tires already, 10 years later. And it had a light. That bike would have had a light too. This runs off carbide. And carbide is a powder that creates a gas, so you would light a wick in there. But look, we still have a spoon brake. See the spoon brake? And we still have a fixed gear. There's no coasting. So I took this to Scotland to ride a century over there, and my wife came along, and she didn't have a bike, so the ladies without bikes were all following us around Glasgow and Edinburgh on the bus. We had a bus for all the antique bike guys, and we were all on our high wheel bikes parading through Edinburgh and Glasgow. It was an event to promote this Scottish cycling, basically. This was in 1990. And so afterwards I said, really sorry about this, honey. I should have got you a bike. So I found this bike. And at the time I was working for Bicycling Magazine, I convinced my editor, hey, we should do a restoration of an antique bike. And he said, okay. So I called up the collector in New Jersey, forgot the guy's, David Metz. And I asked him if he had a nice woman's bike to restore. And he said, sure. So he sells it to me for $450. And I'm thinking, all right, it must be nice if it's $450. And it shows up at the bicycle center, and he just threw it in the box. This was broken, this was broken. I couldn't believe it, but I had an old bike. So I restored it. I did not do the paint. I paid for a professional to do that. And I was all happy. We did a story about it for the magazine. My wife was photographed. And when you ride these bikes, you wear a costume. You dress up like they did. You have to do it right. Well, she rode it 3 feet and said, I hate it. So she's never ridden it. But another woman whose same situation, husband is into the high wheel, she rode it, so it all worked out. But look at how far the bike came in 10 years, and then look at how slowly the bike has progressed since.
Computers now.
There's computers, but why don't we have these amazing bikes? I mean, there are some very interesting things. Like right now, I'm building a bike with a friend who has another friend who wants a bike with a pinion gearbox. Have you seen a pinion gearbox? Crazy high-tech thing. Instead of a bottom bracket, you have this big thing that attaches to the frame, and inside is a planetary gear system, like a hub gear, like a Sturmey Archer gear. It's fascinating. It weighs a ton. But it's the promise of no problems with your derailleurs, which is why people really like it. So that's 1896. 1896, 10 years later. So let's see if we can balance it. So let's see, we're going to jump forward to 1956.
Did they say something about the light? Is that carbide?
Carbide, yeah, carbide. I've never tried to light that, but I've seen them lit. They make a beautiful yellow light, very warm light. So in the mid-50s or so, England had a gasoline crisis, a shortage, just like we had, and in the 70s, but they had theirs sooner. And there was an engineer in England, a guy named Alex Moulton, who was a rubber guy. His father owned a rubber plantation, so they knew about rubber, manufacturing rubber and selling rubber. And he was riding to work on a bike that looked kind of like that. Well, he had invented the suspension for the Mini. Remember the Mini car? Little tiny car? And he had used his products. And the Mini has little tiny wheels, and it has suspension. And he was riding the bike to work every day, thinking, man, this thing is lousy. He said, every time I hit a bump, it kicks me. And he said, it's not stable. The front end is all wobbly. He says, I can get to work, but I'm not having any fun. He said, I can't carry any gear on my bike. He said, I need a bike that fits me, but my son can't fit the bike that fits me. He said, this whole bicycle thing is completely wrong. So he decided he would reinvent the bicycle. So this gets recognized as a different bicycle, a revolutionary bicycle. And it came out at the perfect time because, remember Twiggy, the mini skirts? So he fit right in England, a miniature bike for people that were now getting into small cars, small skirts, skinny. And it is a very interesting bike. Under here is an Allen key.
It's like a big truss.
And if you take it here, you can separate the bike into two parts. And why did he do that? Because he didn't want to make a folding bike. He wanted to make a collapsible bike because it gets smaller. The front end will go forward. So see that from here to here is about the same length as from here to here. So you take that here, you put it here, and you can put two bikes in the boot of a Mini. So he wanted to make a little bike, and of course, it has suspension. See the suspension? And it has to have suspension because the wheels are only 17 inches. So remember what this has what they call a monoball. There's a rubber ball here. You can barely see it. See how it's moving? In the Race Across America, they raced it. You've heard of the Race Across America. And the guys that rode the Moultons, they weren't the fastest. They weren't the slowest. But at the end of the ride, they could all sign their name. They didn't have palsy because they didn't have the issues with their hands and their fingers. So that's one of the advantages. The other thing is that because the wheels are so small, there's all this room for cargo. Now this, I don't have it. I should have bought it when I got the bike. But that there's a rack that looks just like this that attaches here on the front. So you can stack your bags up here and here, and because they're so low, they don't interrupt the handling of the bike. It's a really nice. So this bike came out of the bicycle center too. So that bike came from the bicycle center. We were the West Coast distributor for Moulton bicycles. So Alex would come to our shop and visit. Wonderful guy. When he came to the bicycle center, first thing he said was, "Let's go for a ride." So Roger said, "Well, I don't want to ride with Jim. You ride with him." At the time, he had to be in his 70s. And I said, "Well, where do you want to ride? Westcliff Drive, you know, a couple miles?" He goes, "No, let's go to Davenport." So we had a Moulton for him, and we rode out to Davenport and back, and he was great guy. Had this amazing waterproof jacket, and we got to Davenport, and he said, "I got to make a note." And he reached into his pocket, and he goes, "First, I'd take some pictures." Pulls out a Minox camera. You remember those things? It's like a spy camera, James Bond. He started taking pictures of the ocean. And then he reached in this pocket, and he pulled out this little piece of cardboard. And I'm thinking, what is that? And he folds it out. It's about this big, and it's an organizer, a day organizer. Every day, all the appointments. He had a little tiny pencil, and he wrote something in there, you know, road to Davenport, 20 miles. So I went to England to visit him after that. And he showed me his museum, and it was fantastic. Really, really a wonderful experience. So I have a connection to this bike, and Santa Cruz does, because we sold a bunch of them at the bike center. You guys know Phil Trissel? Remember Phil? He's a Moulton lover. He rides his Moulton. So I was lucky to get this bike from the shop because they're very expensive. And what I was able to get it because Roger wanted to get rid of the whole inventory when he sold it. So I took care of that. I went on eBay and sold it for him. And I get to cherry pick and pick the best one. So that's something about that bike. So suspension, small wheels, completely new design.
They're fast in a pace line too because they're small.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just like a Bike Friday or some of the folding bikes. You can tuck right up to somebody. It's the funniest thing when you're on one of these bikes. You'll hear somebody, you go on a group ride. This happened to me in New Hampshire. It was hilarious. They'd never seen me before. But I'm from New Hampshire. Right? I lived in New Hampshire. So I show up for the ride. It's like 7 in the morning. We start rolling out. There's about 20 guys. And I hear clear as a bell, "Let's get rid of the guy on the clown bike." And the harder they go, the easier it is for me. I'm back there just like, this is a joke. I should just tell these guys, look, it ain't going to work. Then the other thing is when you come to the hill, the wheels are so light, they're attacking, and I'm just like, go ahead, attack. You can't, I just stay right on your wheel. I just spin faster. So it helps that I came from Santa Cruz. So I jumped, so that's in the 50s that concept came out. So this bike, which is called a Randonneuse, or we might just call it a touring bike. But this bike, Rene Herse was an aircraft mechanic in France, very famous. And he, of course, manufactured things for airplanes, and they use a lot of aluminum. So he's a master machinist. And during the war, they couldn't build bikes. And then the Germans bombed France and just destroyed the roads. They couldn't ride, but everybody wanted to as soon as the war ended. Everybody was jumping at the bit. Well, Rene Herse, as soon as he could go back to work, he decided he'd start building bikes because the bike was the perfect escape vehicle for people that had been traumatized all these years, couldn't get out. Didn't matter how bad the roads were if you had a bike that could handle it. So these bikes were built so that on Friday afternoon, you could get your family together, whoever, friends, your wife, or other people, and you could take off for the weekend. So they would leave on a Friday, and they would come back Sunday night in time to go back to work, and they'd have a little adventure. So if you're going to leave work at 4 in the afternoon, let's say, or 5, what are you going to need? You're going to ride to get to your first stop. You're going to need lights. So this bike has a built-in lighting system. Now, this is not to the standards of the lights we have today, but it has a tail light, and it has a headlight, and it has a generator. So all these bikes were built by hand. This bike was built by his right-hand man, John Dubois, who ended up marrying his daughter. So right here to put the generator on, you have a little lever. You generate your own power because you wouldn't want to rely on batteries. You want to carry a bunch of batteries? Of course not. You can make your own electricity. As long as you're moving. That's right.
Rim, not by the tire. Like a lot of these things used to rub on the tire.
That's right. Yep. So this is a Santa Cruz bike too.
Those are very pricey. Those are highly sought out.
Yeah, this is a,
Reproduced lately by Heine, who has Bicycle Quarterly.
yeah.
And those are sell out. They're like thousands of dollars for reproduction.
This is an original bike. This was ordered around 1973 by a diplomat, a guy named Richard Payne, who lived over on the west side of Santa Cruz. A very nice guy. He had two homes, one in Tunisia and one in Santa Cruz. Beautiful Victorian, overlooks on Highland overlooks the ocean. And he would come to Santa Cruz and he would come in and show me the latest bike he bought. And then he asked me to fix the bike. He had this terrible mechanic in Tunisia who would mess up all his bikes. And we'd come to Santa Cruz, he'd bring him in and say, Jim, this mechanic put the left pedal on the right side, the right pedal on the left side. And I'd look at the bike, I'd go, ah! But I'd fix it. I fixed all his problems. And I took care of him for years. And he was a wonderful guy. And he loved to ride. He was still riding in his late 80s. And, but he was a super nice guy and he really knew bikes. So this was one of his bikes. It was kind of a wreck when I got it. The fenders were gone. The cables were rusted inside the frame. Everything was corroded. So I spent 2 years getting it back to the way it probably was. So these are the closest match to the original René Herse fenders you can get. One of the most interesting projects, I want you to look at these aren't decals, that's hand painted on there. If you look closely, you'll see that he painted it. Now look at the handlebars. It matches the paint. Now what's going on here? You think you can get handlebar tape in that color? No, that's white cloth tape with 5 layers of shellac. Real shellac.
Yeah, insect shellac.
Yeah, and what happens is, slowly, the color changes. And you just keep putting shellac on until you match the color. And when you do, you know you did it the way René Herse wanted you to do it. And it gives a kind of a sticky grip. So I mentioned that he was an aircraft mechanic. Look at the, he specialized in aluminum. Look at the stem.
That's distinctly René Herse.
There's all kinds of discussions about how he made these. Some people say they were made with a file and drill, just drilling a big chunk of aluminum. But nobody says that he used a CNC machine. They didn't have CNC machines.
He had a milling machine.
He might have had a milling machine, but they don't talk about that. So it's interesting because it's a way to make it light. It's a way to keep it strong. Some people say it's ugly, but it's beautiful in his design. Now, you can't see it. I have a great picture of this bike on my website, so you can zoom in really big if you want to. But in France, if you get a bike like this, and you buy a bike, he waited 2 years for this bike to be built. They put your name on the stem cap, and that was like a bicycle license. And that unscrews, so I could take it off. But so the lighting on this bike is ingenious. I was talking to Osmond about it a little bit. But the wire starts here, so it's easy to get the wire from the generator to the rear light. But how do you think you get the wire to the headlight? Right, but the frame is not connected to the fork.
Oh, there's contacts.
There is a contact.
Yeah.
And it's super cool how they do it. And I had to figure that out too, which wasn't easy. This bike has sealed bearings in the bottom bracket. This is a crank that René Herse made himself. You see how beautiful it is? Yeah. So it's a very pretty bike. See the protector for you don't have chain slap because you have a rubber protector on here so it doesn't slap. And look at the internal cables. You know, bikes today, it's the other thing I was talking to Osmond about. The bikes today have internal cables. A lot of the carbon bikes, the fancy bikes we have today, wires for the electric shifting and stuff. Well, if you have to put those cables in, say you have cables that run through your handlebars and through your stem, it is a royal pain. There's a shift cable that goes from here to there, old style shifting, down tube shifters. Still, the cable goes through the frame. If you break a cable on one of today's bikes, you're going to have to take the bottom bracket out, push the cable in, fish around in there, try to find it, feed it through here, or you can blow string through with a fan, or there's all kinds of crazy things you can do. So when the cables were broken, when I got the bike, I thought, oh God, I don't even want to tackle this job. It's going to be so bad. And finally I decided I'm going for it. So I got the cable free with lots of liquid wrench, got it to come out, put the cable on the shift lever like you do, fed it into the hole, and guess what happened? Came right out the other end. So there's actually a tube in here, from here to there, from here to there. So basically the guy thought of everything. So.
Under the bottom bracket, you could see the tube feeding.
Yeah, if you look at the bottom bracket, there's a little tube in there. That's where the wire goes. It's a beautifully constructed bike. If you look, it's Fonce Blue, which the famous color that he used, and it hides the details. But if you look close at the craftsmanship, the lug work, the dropouts, like there's a super cool feature on this bike where you can shift the bike onto the bottom cog. And you see now it's not on a cog. You see how it's resting on a little ring?
Yeah.
It's called the chain de repose, the chain at rest. So you could take the wheel off, and the chain is resting on the frame. Can you see it?
I think Peugeot did that, copied that as well.
Yeah. And Campy tried to do it too, but it was an add-on. You see how it's resting on a little bar? It's not on the cog. There's 5 cogs, but at the bottom there's a little bar, chain de repose, which is a great feature. Yeah.
I had a bike that had that. It got stolen.
Oh, that's not good. So one more bike.
Not anymore, but I've seen 2 features that I think are so awesome: the chain to repose and the shocks that are much better than a future shock.
These shocks.
Well,
That's
they
a
suspend the wheel, not the handlebar.
yeah.
That's why it's
Yeah. That's a like a BMW motorcycle has shocks like that. So it's very sophisticated. You can tune it too by tightening the bolts to change the friction. So you'd enjoy riding it. So we have American bike, English bike, French bike. So it's only right we have an Italian bike. So I brought a Cinelli. This is the last bike I bought. Most recent, and I've been trying to find a Cinelli for a long time. And somebody commented on my YouTube channel. Be sure to check out my YouTube channel. So I'll just say that the biggest video on my YouTube channel, 700,000 people have watched it, is how to build wheels the easy way. And I really mean it. It's the first video out there that shows you how to build a wheel from a beginner's point of view. It's not confusing. If it is confusing, send me a comment and I'll explain what you're confused about. I'll get you going again. So I'm really proud of it. I mean, it's not fancy production. I'm not a videographer. I'm an editor. I write about things. So I did it in that context. But if you want to build a wheel, that's where to go. So this is a Cinelli. Cinelli is noted because Cino Cinelli, everybody knows Campanolo, everybody knows Mazzi probably. But Cino Cinelli arguably was one of the most innovative guys in Italy, and that means Campanolo too. He did some amazing things, not just his stems and handlebars, but later he made significant changes to frames. Like he came out with a full sloping crown because he realized that if the fork blade started down here instead of up here, it would stiffen the fork, which ultimately a lot of bikes went to that kind of a design. He also had an ingenious, and I have a video of this on the frame, this innovation that he came up with was called bivalent hubs. And he basically made hubs for bicycles that allowed you to have The rear wheel, you could take it off, put it on the front, take off the front wheel, put it on the back. And the idea was these were racing bikes. So his concept was, in a bike race, if you get a flat tire, why do you have to grab a rear wheel or a front wheel? Why can't the mechanic just grab any wheel, run up to the bike, and pop it in the bike? It was genius, really. And one of the genius things about it was, just like that bike with the chain to repose, the bivalent hubs, when you took the wheel off, the cassette stayed attached to the frame. So the cassette didn't go anywhere. So when you got back on the bike, say you got a flat tire climbing a hill, you're in the gear you want to be in, they're getting away up the hill, the mechanic comes out, changes the wheel, you just jump on the bike and go, you're in the gear you were in before. You don't have to shift it back into the right gear, lose all kinds of time. So he thought he had, and I had one of these bikes, but I couldn't, it was too valuable, I had to sell it. And but before I sold it, I did a video about it. So I show it in my video. It's my videos, you could find it. It's Bob Jackson, it was on a Bob Jackson bike. So he was a super innovative guy, Chino Cinelli. A lot of people think there was only one Cinelli, but he actually had a brother. And his brother was very innovative too, and they were both great racers. So I was really happy to get this bike. This is not the top line bike. Top line bike was called the SC. This is called the Model B. So this was the bike, if you were not the top rider on the team, you'd get one of these. But that's fitting for me. And they're very hard to find, any Cinelli. So I was really happy to get it. And when I rode it, I was even happier because it's a beautiful riding bike. And people always want to know. So this is probably from 1968. It's pretty original as far as I can tell. I've looked up a lot of stuff. And I paid $1,200 for it. So it's not that expensive to get a really cool, nice old bike.
What would that weigh?
This is probably 21 pounds. Yeah, but it might be a little lighter because it has sew-ups. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure what's going on because it's an Italian bike. It has French wheels. So somebody switched out the wheels at some point. I'm going to rebuild the wheels with clinchers so it's a little more practical. But it's
Columbus tubing?
Columbus tubing.
Of course.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful riding bike. I mean, if you rode this around the parking lot, you go, wow, why do we need carbon? I mean, it's not light, but you'll feel that it wants to go. It has that liveliness that any good bike has.
YouTube channel?
So the easiest way to find it, I mean, they have all kinds of fancy ways, but the easiest way to find it is put my name in, Jim Langley, and then just put a plus sign, and then just put bike. Or you could do wheel, yeah. And I'll come right up. I think I have 17,000 subscribers, so.
So you had flats for pedaling in racing? Or
These just don't have toe clips.
okay.
Yeah, so.
For racing, they went with toe clips.
Toe clips, yeah. Actually, that's a fun thing to talk about. So today we have clipless pedals, which I consider one of the great inventions in the history of cycling because it changed everything. But they're called clipless pedals, right? In England and other parts of the world, they call clip-on pedals. And people say, I clip into my pedals. Well, how can they be clip-in pedals and clip into your pedals if there's no clips? Clips means toe clips. That's where it came from. So it's pretty funny. I occasionally will. I have two YouTube videos. One, how to properly install your cleats, and one, how to learn to ride clipless pedals without killing yourself. Because I was there at the very beginning when toe clips went away and clipless pedals came in, and right away we realized this is not easy. So we spent a lot of time educating people. Some of the shops in Santa Cruz wouldn't even carry clipless pedals for the longest time. I couldn't get enough of them. And right down the street at the other shop, they're telling everybody, you don't want to do this, it's dangerous. And I'm like, everybody wants them. So I had to sell them. So we would educate everybody. And they were amazing.
It's not more dangerous than toe clips.
No, absolutely not. I totally agree. You can get so tangled up in toe clips. And I don't know if you raced cyclocross. Did you ever race cyclocross? Yeah. The toe clips were hilarious. So the classic accident that would happen at least once in a race. Like we were at a Rincon up there next to Highway 9. There was the railroad track. You had to ride over the railroad tracks or bunny hop them again and again and again. Somebody was jumping off and jumping on, jumping off and jumping on. And there was a tree with roots you had to go under. And I was racing with Greg Foy, who was still racing very fast. He would pass me, I would pass him, he would pass me. And each time he'd say something like, "You slacker, Langley." So he passes me and he says, "I got you now." And he went off his bike, got out of his toe clips, but so he gets off and he's trying to run and clear an obstacle. Well, the toe clip is now hanging down. And it caught on a root. Hey. And the funniest thing in the world happened. The bike stopped and it hit him right in the neck. And I heard him go, "Ugh!" And his feet went straight out, just straight out. It was like a cartoon. And I said, "Greg, are you okay?" And he goes, "I'm okay, Jim." Cyclocross has changed drastically. I raced in the 80s, and Bob Leibold used to try to kill us. We used to call it jungle cross. Now it's very civilized and very fast, much harder than it was back then.
Tell us how long you rode once a day for how many years and all that. How'd that work out?
Oh, so this is another long story. I'll try to. So I worked at Bicycling Magazine for about 11 years. A great 11 years, great company. And I work with these inspirational guys. They're setting records in RAM and all kinds of guys doing amazing things. And I would go to the office every day and feel like a chump. You know, I was commuting to work. I was riding. I was a pretty good racer, but I started thinking, what could I do? What could I do? I'm not super fast. I'm not super strong. And I thought, there was this guy, Ron Hill, in high school. He was a runner. And he came from England. He was a marathoner. And he ran every day. And he had a record back then, like 25 years, something like that, which I thought was, man, that's crazy. And he ran twice a day. So he died recently, but he made it to 52 years before he died. He died shortly after he stopped running every day. Doctor told him he can't run every day anymore, so he said, okay. But anyway, he was a legend, and all we runners knew about him. So that popped into my head at Bicycling Magazine, and I thought, maybe I can ride every day. So I rode every day for 1,000 days. And they went and gave me the kiss of death. They gave me this beautiful certificate. And a couple days after that, I was riding in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and I hit some black ice, and I broke my hip. So I was so mad because I had set this goal, ride 5 years in a row. And after 3 years, I got a broken hip, and I can't ride. I was absolutely livid. And I was recovering, and I'm thinking, I'm going for 10 years. So in 1993, I started again. No, 92. I started again. December. I have the dates down, but I always forget. But anyway, I started in December of 1992, and I rode at least an hour a day. Now, I could ride a trainer. I didn't have to ride outside. I didn't have to kill myself, but I had to do the honor system, what I considered a real ride, put on my kit. I didn't have to kill myself. I could do an easy day. But I rode for 28 years, 269 days. So, and I would still be riding, but I got sepsis, which was weird and horrible. And they couldn't figure out what was wrong, and I didn't know what was wrong. And I was in a hospital, and they put me on antibiotics, which was the wrong antibiotics. And they put me on more antibiotics, with wrong antibiotics. Finally came back. I was in Arizona, so we have an RV. We were traveling, and that's when it all happened. So I had to go to a doctor who didn't know me. It was in outside of Tombstone, Arizona, funny enough. And a wonderful place if you feel good. And finally I get to the urologist. So finally I see him, and he goes, "These idiots." He goes, "You need to be on the strongest. You can die from this." He goes, "You need to be on Cipro." So I got on the Cipro, and that cured me up. But Cipro's terrible. It's terrible. And so I lost a lot of lung power, and everything changed after the Cipro. So I can ride a bike, but I've lost something. And I'm not going to die, though. I got over the sepsis. But that's what stopped the streak. Well, thank you. You've been a great crowd.